Right, so our next speaker is online, and it's Michael Cromer, and from the University of Technology, and he's going to present Connecting to Country, Aboriginal co-design and the designer's role. Michael, are you going to share your screen? Yeah, you're muted. Good. Fantastic. You're still muted again, but we can see your screen.
How's that?
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. How you going? Yeah, thanks so much for having me here, and thanks for the previous speakers. I've been fascinated with what you're doing, and great to see some of the past UTS colleagues. Great to see what you're doing there. So I'm an architect, ex-UTS, but still completing my PhD there. Coming today from a different perspective, but hopefully it's interesting for everyone. It's around the use of Aboriginal knowledge in design and planning, primarily in the built environment, but also in art spaces, caring for country spaces, ecological spaces. And that's why I'm starting with a lovely image of Joseph Lycett here. He painted country when he first came here and showed how it was curated by Aboriginal people. So fire in particular was a tool being used here to promote grass, promote healthy ecologies, etc. And so I think that's something that's quite important that we're losing today. I'll start by acknowledging Walla Madigal people. That is the traditional owners of the land of Macquarie University. I'm coming to you from Wangal country. And just an interesting point about all of this language, you might notice that they all end in the word gal, or the G-A-L. So Cadigal, Wangal, Wallamadagal. So gal means people. So, and the thing in front of it describes a piece of country or topography. So Caddy, for example, is the grass tree. So I'm sure you've heard of the Gadigal people. So here's the grass tree. So if you're looking for the people of the grass tree, you go there. So that's something I find interesting about place that I think we're losing. And when we name our cities after people, lords from England, Lord Sydney, Lord Melbourne, Perth, I think there's a bit to go back around that. So my family's connections are Badawang Yuan. So Chromek is Czechoslovakian. That's my father's side of the family. But my mother's side comes down from Yuan country, which is down south. I was born in Byron Bay, up in Bundjalung country, but I'm living in Sydney at the moment. So this talk, very briefly, there's a lot to cover in this space, but it's just an introduction towards the idea of incorporating Aboriginal knowledge in planning, in design. This concept of a country first approach, which I think is very much an ecological thing and sustainable thing. And then our role as designers in this space and potential co-design facilitators. And then I'll quickly show a few projects that I've been working on. So I love to start with this map because I think everyone understands the diversity of culture in Europe. You go from one border to the next, you speak a different country, you get different symbols, you get different, and everyone respects that. But it's the same thing in Australia. So as you go from different tribal areas, sometimes they speak completely different languages. And that comes with its own challenge to engage with all of these in a cohesive way. In New Zealand, in many ways, is lucky. They're dealing with one tribe, in a sense, the Maori, one language. A lot of advantages come from that. However, a lot of diversity also comes from this. So just as a starting point. In the design space, the real key drivers are kind of on this screen for me. I'll just start with the documents, the connection to country guidelines by the Government Architect's Office. Really creating a lot of buzz and interest in the construction industry and the built environment industry. People wanting to know, how do we do this in a good way? How do we create legacies for Aboriginal communities? And then how do we get a new Aboriginal design vernacular, which is inclusive of Aboriginal knowledge, and not just imported from England or, you know, different styles. This is a interesting, unique thing. And a lot of leaders, I won't go through them all, but, you know, Kevin O'Brien, Jifa Greenaway, Dylan Commonberry, Carol Gosam, Ruben Burke, just doing amazing work in leading best practice engagement. And for me, it's these three key points. So any Indigenous content should be led by Indigenous people. Community should be involved at the appropriate level, and we should be designing it appropriately. So the first two, I think we all understand why they're important. You know, the effects of colonisation on culture here is, you can't even fathom some of the loss. So having Aboriginal people involved and leading, very important. And engaging community at the right scale is important. You don't want to do go too large. You don't want to go too small, depending on the project, depending on the significance. You really got to get that right as well. It takes a bit of time. And so with project timescales, they don't often align. So there's a lot of conflict there. The last one is the most interesting for me as an architect. How do we design with Aboriginal knowledge in an appropriate way? And how do we consider it in a contemporary lens that is not tokenistic, that is, you know, within the current canon of Aboriginal representation, which is always shifting, and there's a lot of opinions there. But I think there are some certain guidelines that we should consider. And for me, it comes in three main forms: image, space, language. There's a lot more than that, but you know, the surface responses. And I've used a single artist, Rico Rennie, who's a Rajri artist. He's one of his projects in India. So he's using his traditional patterns and symbols to reflect Rajri country and his identity. Space is much more interesting because that's where you can get cultural influence into space, start to design spaces to enhance culture, and in this case, Aboriginal culture, contemporary or traditional. And then language. I think we've got such a beautiful heritage in Australia that there's all these languages, and I think we can use that in multiple ways. And this country first approach it's very much not humans on top curating our environment, but rather how do we fit into it to make it sustainable and make sure it lasts for a long time. So I think it's these kind of focuses that are wholly Indigenous and cut across the whole spectrum of built environment examples. Quick diagram of how you might consider Aboriginal input into a project. So from early schematics, you could be having a whole variety of inputs straight through to construction, but also most important, after a project's over. Because as a designer, you finish the project, you move on to the next one, community's still there and the client's still there. If their relationship isn't good, then it's amazing how much of a relationship building exercise this often is. And I'll just move to a quick point on the appropriateness of design. So I've just done a quick Google search of Aboriginal art, Aboriginal design, and this came up. Now, I don't think these are appropriate. Some of them are less, the Chanel boomerang. I don't know about that one. There's a big problem with fake art. A lot of it coming out of Germany for some reason. I think they must be really good with making wood. Anyway, big problems with that, and basic representations of Aboriginal people. And this again, quite effective in terms of built environment and raising an individual up. However, some of these representations are pretty obvious, and for me, there can be a much more nuanced and integrated and co-designed approach. A few other examples, I'll just talk about the middle one. So this is in Melbourne, William Barrack's face in the facade of a building. Amazing facade for me. It's powerful. However, this has caused a lot of divisions in community, in particular the Wurundjeri community, who say, why is his uncle up there and not my uncle? And then bang, suddenly a building has created a division in the community because one family was consulted, the other one wasn't. So I think there's some shared things that we can focus on that are much more appropriate than those following. So can you still see my slide deck? I think my other computer crashed and my slides might have ended there, but that might actually be an appropriate spot to stop. Yeah, sorry, I'm on two devices. And
we can see the slide on what's appropriate Aboriginal design.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm on two devices, one with a camera, one without one. And my slide deck was on the other one. I was just going to end on two other slides that were projects that touch on a bit more of an interesting perspective for Aboriginal design. Rico Rennie was the artist who I was going to talk about. But hopefully that was interesting, and love to know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any online questions? Oh, we have a live question. I could see a hand. Do we have any online questions while we get the micro there? Okay, you can't see it, but there's someone running to get the microphone there.
Okay.
So Oscar is...
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I know that you have talked about appropriateness of culture. I'm a foreigner here in this country, but I also feel Australian. And one of the things that I have always thought is just that, you know, it would be great for every Australian and not only Aboriginal Australians to appropriate the Aboriginal culture precisely for the reasons that you have explained here to us. So for example, when you said that for every project, we have to have some Aboriginal people leading that project, don't you think also that it would be very interesting if, you know, that knowledge is passing on to every one of us?
Oh, yeah.
And then
totally agree.
I mean, I don't want to say I'm Aboriginal, you know, but when you say Gadigal, for example, somehow I feel recognized, you know, because I'm from Redfern, or I live in Redfern now.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I'm Aboriginal, but yeah.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and elders and uncles say, if you don't share knowledge, it's going to die. And I agree with you. And so I think, you know, so there, if you'd start to develop relationships, and you don't have to be Aboriginal to do it, but if you develop relationships with the community, then you don't necessarily, if you have a strong relation, if the client has a strong relationship, you don't necessarily need that Aboriginal broker. But I think from a first basic perspectives, often projects or clients or places, they don't know who the traditional owners are. And they're like, what do we do? So a good place to start is to start to get Aboriginal people involved to help lead that. And that helps break down particularly tricky communities. There's some communities that are overly consulted. You know, they get consulted so much, and and you need that kind of community broker. However, if you're a non-Indigenous person and can do that, that's totally awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.